What up? What's up?
I'm making some coffee. I'll be back in a sec.
Alrighty. Let's see. Can we do some stuff today? Maybe possible. Could be done. Some ones and zeros and vectors, that's true. Vectors are also ones and zeros though. But I'm sure we can manage some. Whew. I am forcing it a bit. I'm very tired in the brain. I don't know shit about coding. Fair enough. Fair enough. So let's see. We left off here with windows that we can make and pull around. So now the question is, what do we do with this? And also, how do I print text in here? What are they? They're windows. They're empty windows. And now we are going to put some windows into them. No, some stuff into them. Maybe. First, we need to create a text renderer. And maybe that'll be its own component here. I'm just thinking, like, how should I handle text? I feel like we have to write an entire thing for text. Here's just a pain in the ass. We have an entity renderer. And now it creates the issue that, so, as we're rendering things, everything has to be rendered in a certain order. So all of the objects need to be sorted in a certain way for the rendering to be correct, right? And all of that is handled by putting them in some kind of list. And then we run sorting algorithms and whatever on them. And then we just go through the lists and we call the renderer on each object and they just draw themselves, right? But the problem is that the text renderer well, maybe it's not a problem actually. Because the text renderer is also a renderer. I have an idea. Kind of. I could say that an entity can only have one renderer on it. That would simplify it. Because otherwise, you have to like determine which order will things be rendered in. Because if I have like I put a sprite renderer and a text renderer on the same object, which order will it be rendered? It would literally just be like which order are the renderers like added to the object. So if we add a sprite renderer first and then a text renderer, then the sprite renderer would render first and then the text renderer would render after. And that way we could render text on top of a sprite, for example. But the thing is, I could just make it so that one object can only have one renderer type. So if you have a sprite renderer, you cannot have a text renderer. But instead, if you want to have text somewhere on an object, you have to add another entity with a text renderer there. That is one way to do it. I could also just make the entity renderer able to render text. But I feel like that's gonna bloat it unnecessarily. And I think that you should have to have an entity that contains the text. That's how it should work. But see, the problem is that if we go to an entity, the entity has a draw function here that will then draw a sprite. Right. And that is what makes this kind of weird. because it's calling only the sprite renderer here. So what I would like to do is I would like to make another component here called only renderer, which inherits from component. The entity renderer, it just looks like this: sprite, mirror, color. I do think we can put color inside of the renderer here. And then in the renderer, this doesn't have a constructor. So what I want to do is I want to say that this renderer is actually what we are inheriting from here. And then the question is this all correct? Yeah. And then inside of the entity, we can say that this is a renderer and we refer to this as renderer, and then we do renderer.draw. But then that's what the renderer needs to have. It needs to have this. It needs to have YouTube is just shitting the bed. Give me a second here. That doesn't work. Right. That doesn't work. What about... Does that work? No. Nothing is easy. Does that work? No. Okay. YouTube is just not feeling it today. Should have saved the playlist from yesterday. Let's just recreate it. StarCraft, Brood War. And the StarCraft soundtrack is so good. Holy. Good enough. There we go. And some coffee. Some 9 p.m. coffee. So this draw call needs to be... what the fuck was that? This draw call needs to be virtual. And the renderer... I don't think it has more than just a draw call. Yeah, no. It doesn't need to contain anything, because there won't ever be a basic renderer like that. It's gonna be the entity renderer, which I should probably rename to sprite renderer again. Because now it's not doing text. Oh, yeah. And then we go to the entity here. And now the thing is that I used to just say add component here. But we can't just say, we can't just do this anymore. We have to give every object a renderer on purpose. And then we just say if renderer equals null, return, and that's it. And then we go into the prefabs. And this is a test window, so here we're changing this transform, so window entity dot add component. Oh. That's it. Doesn't really need to do anything else. We should say window entity dot renderer equals sprite renderer. Unity doesn't do this. It doesn't have like a... You can just access this. You need to have like mesh renderer or sprite renderer, and you need to grab it yourself, and so it's really no different. You know, like having to set something like this. It's not actually any more difficult or anything like that than it would be in Unity. This is a bit of a... This kind of sucks, though. And this might mean that it's not... Like, we don't really want to do it this way. Right? Because if I do this, then I can't actually set the sprite in the renderer. Like, now we have to do a sprite renderer cast, which sucks. I hate having to do that. Because it's like this now. And I think maybe we should just not do this. I feel like this is just creating issues. But then the... Because you see, it's the fact that we have the draw here now that makes this annoying. Because if I don't have the renderer here at all, then we can't do a recursive draw. Because it needs to be cached internally for it to recursively draw. I'm just trying to think of, like, what the best way to do this would be. Because I feel like it should kind of be something like this, right? Like, you have a child list of entities. But the fact that you have to do the draw call here, I think, kind of blows. But it's like... Or maybe it should just be like an update. Right? So that's how it works in Unity. We just make like a universal update. And then we put these in a list. It could be a class. It could be like an update or like a container, like a special class. And that class contains a list. It's kind of like a level. You make a class that's like a level. and it can contain itself. So I don't know if this is too complicated, because I'm thinking like we make a class C. This class contains a list of entities, right? But it also contains a C. And the C... No, this doesn't make any sense. Oh, this is so dumb. No, it is the entity that should contain the entity. The entity is kind of what I'm thinking of here. And that's why... it should work the way I'm doing it. So what we could do is that we give every component a draw. We go into here, component, and we say public void update public void draw. I don't even really think draw should need to take sprite batch, but maybe maybe. What else do we have? We have an update. I kind of like the late update, but whatever. And then we simply do it this way, that we don't have... I mean, I don't really like this method. I think it's kind of shit because it's very clunky. But I don't know if it matters. So then what we'll do is... in draw... we're not going to say dot draw. Or maybe we are. But we're not gonna say... I don't know. I feel like this is so bad. But we can iterate through the component dictionary. You can iterate through that using an indexer, right? Or does it need to be... No, this is a key only. Let me check. Dictionary does not guarantee any specific iteration order. The for each order depends on the internal hash bucket layout. Sorted dictionary, no. I mean, it would have to be like a... Let's recall. I'm just not sure. Then I get it's alright. A little tired in the brain. We'll see what we can manage. Order the dictionary. An ordered dictionary. Ordered dictionary. Oh my god, the example is so complicated. Insert. Does this exist? Using system dot collections dot collections dot specialized public ordered dictionary int component Component ordered dict. Why is it throwing an error? Represents a collection of key/value pairs. The generic type ordered dictionary cannot be used with type arguments. Why the fuck not? Show me, bitch. What? What? It doesn't use key value pairs? You just do it like this? Why? And you can't know what the value is. I mean, does it even matter? I think maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we just use a list. Like, just a list. I don't know. And then instead, we're not gonna say this. We're not, we are gonna do this. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through all of our components. We're always gonna go through all components on an object and call draw. Well, what are we doing here? Yeah, it's just doing renderer.draw. That's what needs to go. Because this is what we're getting rid of. And then for children, after we've done that, we then need to do this for children. We draw there. It is a little bit less optimized, I would say, but it's like negligible, right? Because we won't be using that many components. Like, yeah, we'll have a transform, and because of that, we could always start at 1, because transform is always 1 or always 0. So we can always start at component list I equals 1. on draw. And then we need an update. Public void update. And that's going to do the exact same thing. Except here it's going to call update instead. And then every component is just going to have an update. Whether it has an update or not, because the renderer doesn't really have an update. It just draws. But it still has an update. But the update is going to be to instantly just return. And same thing with the draw. The draw also just instantly returns. And that way, we can have a sprite renderer and a text renderer on the same object. Something I think it shouldn't really have, but we can. And then it'll just render in order. But it can have that. Now we need to go through all of these to see where all my... well, I've generated errors. So here now we're initializing. We are adding a window. And we're saying if base entity dot component dictionary does not contain key, but we're gonna say if base entity dot component list does not contain sprite renderer, but that's not correct either. So we actually have to make a find, I think. Because we can't just say, like, if it doesn't contain this. We have to say... entity a public bool contains component type. Type for component list dot count if component list. Let's start at 1 again, because no, actually we might be looking for a transform, which would be retarded, so let's not do that. We can just immediately say if type equals type of transform, then return true. And then here we're gonna just go through the component list. If type of component equals type, return true. Why does this not work? Oh no, it needs to be get type here. You can only do get type from a class. Otherwise, we return false. Then we go back to window, and here we're now going to say base entity dot contains component type sprite renderer type of then we're going to add a sprite renderer. Else base entity dot get component out sprite renderer that's just how it's gonna have to be. We're just gonna have to fetch it. It is what it is. And this can just be one line here. Let me ease this up a bit like that. No. Okay, so this needs to be like this. And then this is just SR, SR, like that. Entity, add component. If contains key index. But here now we're taking a type, so now we can say if contains component type component dot get type. And then component list dot add, and it just needs to be component, and that's it. And here's where it's a little shittier now, because we need to do a for loop lookup for a get component in a list. But I think it's fine. I hope it's fine. I don't know if it's actually fine. No, it's fine. I'm not actually doing get components to draw. Because that's what I was really worried about. We're not doing that. We're just doing draw in component list. So we're just iterating through them. We're not doing get components. Okay. So here what we're gonna do is we're gonna say we're trying to get a component of type T But then we don't need the index in the same way. No? 4? Oh, so much for double tapping. Fuck you. I even updated Visual Studio today. They still haven't fixed this. So stupid. So, what do we do here? We're doing a get component of type T. What is T in this scenario? Is T a type? Because I feel like we shouldn't be using this component here. But it also doesn't matter. Like here we're doing get type. But that's fine. No, this is fine. It's here. Because isn't T a type? Like, what is T? T is a type, which is not valid. It takes a type. Fuck you. Like, what? Okay, it's a type and it needs to be transformed into a type class. Right, that's different. This is not something we need to do anymore. We're just trying to add a component with a type. We don't need to do anything, I think, really. Yeah, this should be right. But then I also don't know if I need my master reference list of components anymore. Okay, so get component 4. Let's do this. Type of T. get component. If component list I dot get type equals type, then return, no, then component equals component list I return. E return true. This goes. This goes. Else we do that. I mean, we could make it so that add component just returns the component. Yeah, let's do that. I like that. If contains component type. This doesn't need to return a bool. This should just be a void. So then we're gonna say if contains component type, then, but that also means I don't really want to run this. So then this should just be and then we're gonna say component equals component list I as T return. And if that isn't true, then we're gonna do this. Then we add this, and then we're good. And the reason for that is because then that saves us from having to do something like this, right? Because now we don't have to do a check. Oh, does it already contain the sprite renderer? No, we just add it. We just add it. And then if it exists, then we just don't add it and we return it. So then here when we initialize, it just becomes so easy. I like that a lot. We're unfortunately going to have to work on this. What are we doing here? Clickable dynamic GUI list. This is just gonna have to be a for loop, I think. For... Hello, Toby, how's it going? For you, clickable dynamic GUI list dot count. And then we're gonna say... No. I dot... Entity master dictionary. Clickable dynamic GUI list. What are the features of any language you hate the most? I don't know. I guess library dependency from like Node.js or something, or simply just indentations as brackets. Like in Python. That's retarded. I hate that. So then we work through the component list here. And then we say if this is now a little annoying, unfortunately. We have to do EU. That's what it's gonna be now. I think that should be correct. That's only one of them. This, let's see. Can we turn this into a class? Oh, no, not a class, a function. Public bool run click collision check. And then it needs to take... What is this? This is just a list. List. Int. I could do the same thing here. Like, we could just have in component, just as we have draw in everything, we have update in everything, we could also have public virtual void. I mean, is this a bad way of doing this? I don't know if it really matters. Hold up. What the fuck does this mean? I don't know computer science. The real performance cost in ECS style systems isn't the virtual call, it's pointer chasing through memory. If your entities/components are scattered across the heap, which they will be if you knew them individually, iterating 1,000 of them means the CPU cache is constantly missing and fetching from RAM. This hurts far more than empty virtual calls. The classic ECS solution is data-oriented design. Store components of the same type contiguously. Practical advice for your situation. For each, all sprite renderers draw. No, that's not doable. Flags. Flags. The flag. Enum component flags. Oh, that makes sense. You can have bit flags. Interesting. Interesting. Yes, let's do that. So enum, then we'll say public enum component flags update equals 1, draw equals 2, mouse input. I don't know what we should call it. Mouse. Mouse update. Mouse input. I don't know what else it would need. But I think that would be good enough. So you do that, and then on an entity, we then say, what the fuck? Public component flags and then all components should come with a component flag as well. Public component flags. Component flags. And then we just go through them. Button would have I don't know if it should take a mouse state or if it should take like a position. I'm not sure. But whatever. I just wanted to maybe make a component constructor. We'll just make it empty. And that's just because in the renderer here, I wanted to just set its flags. So then here we just say component flags raw. And this renderer solution, this is now obsolete again. This should now just be a component once more. Public sprite renderer. And then flags draw. Yeah. I take the color and give it back to sprite renderer. And in fact, this one should just be removed now. A transform. The transform doesn't have anything. It's just chill. So it doesn't need to do anything special there. The window. Flags equals mouse input. That's a flag there. I don't know if the window has an update. It might. It does, doesn't it? Because it has a window behavior. So it has an update. What do you mean it can't be applied? Isn't this how you do it? Do we just split it up then, I guess? Well, actually, no, it's, you do it like that. Yeah. To some extent, I'm feeling like, does a button even make sense as a component? Like, is that really the best way to do a button? I don't know. I don't really feel like it is. Because I feel like you could do this in two ways, right? So, the sprite renderer draws the current sprite, and that's what it does. It just draws. We don't actually need the sprite renderer at all to draw in the first place. So an object that has the window component wouldn't necessarily need the sprite renderer. Now, it probably should have the sprite renderer, but it doesn't need to have it. So because the way you could do it is that so I have a few options here, I feel like. So I could just make buttons be entities. And then each button has a transform, you add a rect to it, and then you draw it using the sprite renderer with the sprite you've attached. Right? And I feel like that's probably the way we're gonna go about it, but I feel like you could almost do it in a better way, where a button is just a function of the window. And then the window has a draw function that just draws out the buttons. Because a draw step is just the sprite batch. Like, it's just using the sprite batch and just drawing with that. So that way you wouldn't need to have like tons of entities. Because it's gonna end up being like almost like in Unity, where a button is like 4 components. Or 4 entities. I hate that. But we can avoid that to some degree here, where we can say that one entity can have multiple renderers. So as long as the sprite renderer comes first in the order on the button, you can have the sprite renderer and the text renderer in the same like entity, and that way you can save some space there, and you can just do everything in order that way. I'm just thinking. Because this is actually, I think we're gonna do it this way. The button is going to have a public bool override mouse input. And I do think that the mouse input should return a bool. And it should say return false. And thus, we need a public button base component flags. Mouse input. And then in the end, initialization, base entity dot component flags, component flags. Well, hold on. Why doesn't the component take an entity? I think it should. And then we can say base entity dot component flags. Mouse input and update. Yeah, I think that's good. And then we need to go back here. And let's see. Run click collision. So this needs to take... This is a little more... Oh. But yeah, so here we should have another enum here. And this should be public enum clickable layer. Object equals 1. Game GUI equals 2. Static GUI equals 4. Dynamic GUI equals 8. And then the window needs to have public clickable layer is 0. I don't know if this is bad, right? Because I feel like it would be nice to be able to have like a specific overload for this component. But I don't think you can do that. Like you can't have... At least I don't think so. Let's see what we can find out. Oh, okay. So it's only about fulfilling the base class's parameter with base. Oh, interesting. Then that would mean we have to change. Yeah, I think we should do that. That way we can get rid of initialize. I kind of hate having initialize. It kind of blows. But we would have to do something like in entity, in add component, it's not just out t component, it's gonna have to be. And now the question is, should we even out it? I don't really know if we should. Because I'm gonna have to just say t component. I guess it doesn't matter. Like, we can do an out t component. And then if we go to prefabs, this should no longer actually work. But it does. Which is wrong. Because it's just doing that. And if it's out, then it doesn't matter, because we have to cache it and create it first anyway. Don't we? Yeah, you can't do this. Okay. In that case, I like the out, but it's gonna have to go. I think. Like, it's still possible to just have both as well. Right? We can make an overload. Right? Right? We just do this. We say add component. And then we say only T. And then we have another add component that has the out. But then we also have an in. And this is then add component core. Which will just take a component. And then we're gonna say add component core. Component in. And then here we're gonna say add component. Component in. No, this should be parentheses. And then we say component out equals component in. Very simple solution. And then this just does that. And then here we say window entity add component new sprite renderer entity window entity, and then it says out sprite renderer. That way we just have the sprite renderer here. We don't have to do this. Same thing here, we just say new window entity out window component. Yeah, I think this is badass. I like this. And then here we have the sprite renderer. Frame entity. This is now just the sprite renderer. And then here we create a frame entity. And see, this is what I wanted to try to avoid here. Like, I don't want to do all of this bullshit, right? So all of this should be handled automatically. So we are adding a window. The window on top of the entity should take a clickable layer. It should also potentially take like a list of buttons or something, but I think that's fine. But the clickable layer should then be this.clickable layer equals clickable layer. And what that should do is that there should be a public void set clickable layer. Clickable layer. Clickable layer. And it should be this dot clickable layer equals clickable layer. And this should be as such. Should have a public clickable layer. Clickable layer. Yet as such. And so this should say set clickable layer. And then this should say globals.main. If clickable layer equals game object clickable layer dot object then this should be added to clickable game object list dot, but it's not as simple as just a dot add, but it can also be. Actually, I think it should be, because like I could yeah, we're just gonna add it, right? And we're gonna add entity, I think, or base entity. Yes. And then if we go back to the component, in the mouse input, it's also going to have a clickable layer, current layer. And then in window, in our clickable layer, which we haven't made yet, but there's a public bool public override bool mouse input. And then it has all of this bullshit, right? And then it's gonna say if current layer does not equal clickable layer, then we return. false. Else return false as well. Right? That way, what we can do is that every object that contains a component that is clickable, we will then add the object to that list. They can still be integers. Maybe it should be a sorted list. Or maybe not. I guess that works. I wasn't thinking of that. Isn't that a little lame? Basically, the entities have an ID, right? Each entity has a permanent ID that never changes. And as such, I wanted to use like a hash set to add it to the list of clickable objects. But the list of clickable objects needs to be in order. It needs to be sorted in a certain way. Like the dynamic the dynamic list needs, you need to be able to move things to the front so that they can be detected first While in the others, it doesn't really matter as much, but it could matter in some cases. Like for game objects, it could matter with what order they're in. You don't really actually want to handle game objects like that. Like you don't want, if you have game objects that are sorted and can move around like dynamically, you don't want a system where you have to click like the sprite and detect the sprite, because then the sprite might hide a sprite behind it. And in those kind of scenarios, it's better to click like an area around their feet or something. So it becomes like a little selection box at the bottom. Or like you click the tile it's standing on or something like that. But like clicking on the actual character is usually very bad. It does work, but it has significant issues often. But it can also feel better. So it comes at both solutions come at a bit of a trade-off. But you can also use a bit of a mix. For like targeting and stuff, it might be nice to be able to click on an object, but that's also where it becomes hard, because then you might not be able to target another object. But either way, I just wanted a collection that could handle this, but it's telling me to just use a list and a hash set, and I guess that works. But it just feels a little... just feels kind of defeated. Like this. Like we don't have a solution, we're just gonna use two. I guess that works. And so here then we would just have to say that these are all just integers, right? And then we want hash set And should we do the same here for these? I think so. And then we need, it can't just be game object render list, it needs to be public void add object to render, add entity to render list, right? Entity, and then what if we call this something else? This isn't just a clickable layer. This is, though it could be. Like, I don't know if I want to reuse this. Let's just make it 2 layers. Let's call this this is a render layer. Because that might change. Render layer. Render layer. Oh, hiccups. Then we're gonna say if render layer equals render layer dot object. Well, actually, let's use, I don't typically like using them, but let's use switch. We say render layer. Oh, very nice. Just filled it in. Default is return. And then here we're gonna say case render layer object. If game object render set dot contains is that it? Try get value. All right. Contains entity.id then we're just gonna say return, else we'll say game object render set dot add entity.id. I'm gonna change this. This is now just ID. What's I gonna do? Oh yeah, change that to ID. And then we'll also say game object render list dot add. There it's the entity. And then we return. And then here we're gonna say if the render set contains the entity, then we'll remove both. Otherwise, we're just going to return. Dynamic GUI render set. Okay, so now we have that, I suppose. That way. This is a render list. But that's where I now want to have booleans. Public bool sort. object sort object render list. Sort game object render list. Sort game GUI render list. Sort static GUI render list. This one is always going to be false, I would say. Sort dynamic GUI render list. This one shouldn't be used, I think. Because the dynamic GUI render list only... like that's not a thing. That's not a thing. This is not a thing. These two are a thing. So here, if sort game object render list equals true. Same thing here. Sort game object render list equals true. Now, when we remove, we don't need to do that. Because removing it doesn't cause any issues with the render list. So it's only when we add an object and I could have it sort itself. It could like go through it and add itself where it should be. But the reason I don't know if I really want to do that is because what if we add like 20, 30 objects in one update? That way, we would just want to add them and then do the sort after. Otherwise, we're doing 20 sorts. So we want to do this, and then we want to create a sort later. Now, I was working on this. So it says run click collision check. And we are just passing in mouse state.position. So I feel like we could just pass in mouse state. Even more so, it's a question of should we pass in both mouse state and mouse state old. Technically, I think we shouldn't have to do either. I think it should be like this. Check left click. Mouse state is being set here. Because, like, I don't know how I like this. The monogame way, the way it's set up by default, seems to be passing things along through the parameters. I think that's unnecessary and annoying as fuck. So, I think I want it to be like this. We can do it, like, I don't think this really matters, but we can do it like this. And make a getter. I don't know if I really care. This is one of those things where I just kind of do them because I have read without context, like, you know, you shouldn't have things be public and stuff like that, but it's all like just like borderline bullshit. Not 100% bullshit, but like 99% bullshit. But yeah, we have a getter there. And then we also want to have mouse state old, previous mouse state. which is up here. Right, and then we put that there. I don't know what I'd like. Should it be an undercase or lowercase? Because I see people do underscore uppercase M for private variables. I don't know if I care. Hello, ho, ho. Let's do the same thing here again. Previous mouse state. And then we return that. Whew. Doing a little bit of everything. I reworked my components a bit. And how the rendering and like click detection works. You could use an auto-implemented property if you're not putting logic in the getter. Yeah, how does that work? Prop tab. Oh, I don't understand. Which one is the prop? Like just prop? Like this? Oh, one of these. But how does this work? Hmm. You put access modifiers on the getter and setter, so you do like a private set and public get. Didn't like that. Is it public by default? The backing field is there, but it's okay. Yeah, makes sense. This is something I just never... I honestly, I don't even use getters and setters that much. And I only do it just because. Kind of. So you do that, and then... Can you do it like this? Yeah, no, okay, you couldn't. It was the inline suggestion that solved it. Okay. Yeah, let's do that then. Why am I doing this? Why am I setting previous mouse state here? Oh, it's because... Oh, yeah. This is an early return. Early return. What you wrote was prop full. Tab is just a full property, gives you space for logic in the getters and setters, whereas prop just gives you access modifiers. No, don't worry. Half the time I would rather talk to someone, so it's fine. Um, so this should be mouse state now. Yeah, because what I was saying was the monogame way is to send values in via the function. And I get it, but it's annoying. It's more stuff to type all the time. I don't like it. So I generally would just rather have a global accessor to the main controller script, and then I just access whatever I'm trying to read, you know. Like here, in the window, and here's the same thing with the clickable layer. But it doesn't matter that much. Then here we now have mouse input, and now here we have like a mouse state, whatever. But like, go to base. I don't feel like it should need to take the mouse state. The mouse state, whenever we get to mouse input, the mouse state should already be established. That way we can read both the mouse state and the previous mouse state, and we can just do whatever logic we want in here without having to pass the stuff in. Like, passing things in, I think it does add like some security, but only if you're like doing things in a way where you might not have control over execution orders or something. I don't know. But for this, definitely, we're gonna do it this way. So then we have this, and then we go into window. Then here in mouse input, we are going to say, if current layer is that, then we're gonna say else. It doesn't need an else. It's gonna be else. It's gonna be window behavior dot click collision. I'm gonna call it mouse input, I think. And that takes a position. Let's instead say it takes nothing. And then here we just say main controller dot access. No, it's globals dot main dot mouse state dot position. Or we can say mouse state. But I feel like this is kind of bad, because mouse state is a huge struct, so I don't think caching it is a good idea. Because it's not cached, it's copied. So it would have to be caching the position. But I don't think it matters either. Just makes it ugly. Or rather, this is ugly. A bit. And then it's just something like that, right? I'm gonna rename this to mouse input. One unresolvable conflicts. Okay, what's that unresolvable conflict? I'm gonna call it mouse input. Then we go to the window, we call this mouse input. New sprite renderer. Base entity. Now this is wrong. We're no longer initializing like that. We're doing it via the constructor now. Clickable layer. Size, movable. Right, window behavior. Should it have all of this shit in the constructor? That's a big constructor. I don't think it should need to take a sprite here either. But the sprite can also be null. By default. And then let's see. This kind of sucks. Doesn't it? A little bit. And this isn't right either. Yeah, I think we have to ditch this. The out. I don't think that's gonna work. Even so, that's not necessarily the biggest issue here. See, the thing here is just that we might now be unnecessarily creating components, and that's going to break everything. Fuck. Here's the problem. So what I wanted to do was I wanted the add component to take a component, which means we have to do new component, new window, new sprite renderer, whatever. But the issue is then what we're doing here is we feed it into add component core, where we check if the component exists. And if it exists, then we return the one that has already been, like the one that already existed. Otherwise, we add the new one, and then we return the new one. And that is then either not returned, or it's returned by an out. And that was just to make it easier to like initialize stuff afterwards. It just felt nice. But here's the problem right now. We can actually still do this. It is doable. But the problem is that I moved initialization into the constructor. And that means that the entity is assigned, and then we do everything. Like, if this window is clickable layer dynamic window, then it adds the entity to the dynamic clickable windows list, right? But what if the window, well, what if the entity already has a window component? Then it's doing all of this initialization, and then it's getting discarded. So that doesn't make sense. So what that means is that we have to, if I'm gonna do this new component thing, which is a little shitty, I think it's a little shitty, but I don't know how else really to do it, because if it was just like entity dot, let's go over here. See, here we have a window entity, and if we then say window entity dot add component, and if it's just like a type like this, like let's say window, if you just do that, then it's gonna have to add the component based on the type, which is fine. But what about parameters in that scenario? Like, how could I make add component dynamically require parameters based on the type that it's fed in? I don't know if you can do that. It would have to just be overloads, and that doesn't make any sense, I think. Pretty sure you can create your own components, which will have the field you want in it. Oh, y'all. Yeah, I can, and that's what it is now. But the issue is that I don't want to have to say like new window and then fill things in, because that will it does things in the wrong order. In that scenario, it will, like, let's say it is honestly like an edge case thing that I'm trying to solve, which isn't really a problem. But let's say I have an entity, and then that entity has like a sprite renderer component on it. And I then add the window, and the window then like just adds the sprite renderer component as well because it needs it. It then, in the current solution, I have to do like new sprite renderer. And that means that you always create the sprite renderer. Whereas I would like it to be the other way around, where you do add component as a type, and then you can feed it in parameters as well. And then it will check the types first before it runs the new, right? But I don't think you can do that dynamically with a function in this way. Let me see here. Yeah, no. You can take like params object array args, and then that does work. But the issue with that I'd really dislike is that you don't get any intelligence with that, I think. Like if you do add component, params, object, args, that's not gonna take anything. In particular. Yeah, no. It's just gonna be like that. Which works, but it sucks. Right? But there are many solutions to this. I'm just trying to see if I can do it in a cool way. Because add component doesn't really need to have a check, right? Like it, because we can just check before we do add component. Like if window entity does not have a sprite renderer, then we add a sprite renderer. You know, it's that simple. I just like the idea of being able to just say add component, and then it only adds it if it doesn't exist. Which I think is also maybe a bit error prone. Or like not understandable where the error might be. So I think maybe what I'm trying to do is at the end of the day the worst thing to do. Yeah. But also that does I think we should still have an initialize thing. Perhaps. Or maybe not. There is another way of doing it. We could maybe... I don't know if you can do that. Throwing in constructors is generally considered bad practice. A static factory method. Maybe. Is that the smartest way to do this? Because I just would like it to be more automated. I am getting caught up on a bunch of bullshit today though, but basically Basically, if we can do sprite renderer.create here instead of new sprite renderer, that way we can pass in everything into sprite renderer.create, which is a static instead of a constructor. And then inside of there, we can then return a null, which we can then catch in add component. Because then we can say, because we have access to the base entity and we know what the type is, so the create function itself can just check itself against base entity to see if it contains the component already, and then just say no. Right? So I think maybe that is a smart solution. No, it needs to be in here. It's doing this, though. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it was just wrong. Stupid computer. The question mark is nullable, and that's for structs, not for classes. This doesn't necessarily work either. Or maybe it does. Yeah, because this doesn't need to be a virtual or an override, right? This should just be hidden. And in fact, it doesn't need to be inherited at all. It's just a matter of every component having it, not about inheritance. Because you always only want to do that from the class, not from a component. Right? So we then here want to take an entity, and then we say if entity dot contains component type of this, this dot type of this. No, this doesn't work because it's static, so it's in an uninstantiated instance. It's gonna have to be sprite renderer type of. Then we return null. Else we return new sprite renderer entity. I like that. Allow type of class, really useful with component and entity. Yeah. But I've always been a little confused. Like, I kind of get it. I'm not entirely, like... Because I feel like you should be able to pass the class. But I don't know. It just doesn't let you do that. You have to convert it into a type of, which is like... To me, like, almost means like, okay, so you can pass in the class into type of. So why can't you pass the class as an object? Or maybe you can. Maybe you just do like object or something, or class. No, class isn't like, it doesn't let you do class. Class instance. Nah. I don't really want to do it any other way, but it's one of those things that, like, I guess I don't just understand 100%. But yeah, so then we do that, and then we go to entity, and then it's add component. And then here we're just gonna say if component in equals null, return. And that's it. We can have like a debug.write line. I don't really know what to write here. I'm so used to Unity that I don't really know how to write a good debug write line, because right now it's just writing into the console and then it just says exactly what is written here. While in Unity, you can always click on it and it'll take you to where it was written in the script. So I don't know if there's a good way to do something similar here, or if I'm just gonna have to just figure it out. Either way, attempted to add null component to entity ID, you know, maybe something like that, plus entity ID. Maybe. I don't know. I also don't know exactly if you have to do like toString and stuff here. I think maybe you do. I don't know. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. And same thing here. And then here we'll say component out equals null. This doesn't need to do this. Because now we can make a check, right? Like we're checking already before we add the component in the first place. So we can just say component out equals component in. Already there. And then we just return there. Generics is good, but it primarily works on type or simple class. I do not find another use of generics than ECS. I honestly don't even know what generics is. I don't know programming terminology very well. Is that just object? It's when you see T or... Oh, okay. Yeah. It's about time to stop. I'm super sleepy. Let's just try to fix this. I have 40 errors, unfortunately, but... I do think what we've done today has been correct. Basically, the main bulk of everything I changed today was the component. So I just made every single component have basic calls. Update, draw, mouse input. And that's to make every object capable of doing the most fundamental calls that exist in the engine, right? And then they will just return blank. But what we're really going to do is we're going to use this component flags. And each component then has a flag, a bitwise flag. So here, the sprite renderer, for example, it has a component flag of draw, while the window has a component flag of mouse input and update. And then what we're gonna do is, as we're going through the update loop, we're then gonna have a bunch of objects in that update loop. And for every object, we're going to iterate through all of their components. But we're going to make a component flag check against the component before we access it. Actually, I don't know if that's even worse. Isn't that actually worse than just running it? No, it's not. Well, it kind of is. Kind of not. Because we flag this on the entity. Because we flag it on the entity, if the entity doesn't have like a draw pass, well, it would. But if it doesn't have like a mouse input pass or an update or whatever, then we can just skip past it without having to iterate through everything. Because it would mean that it would have to access each of its components in order to return blank. Like, I think it's still a negligible optimization, but I don't know. Either way, it's done, and it wasn't really that big of a deal anyway. It's just like one enum, almost. But the component flags also... Yeah, I don't know. You know, the component flags don't do much. But we have like a clickable layer stuff. I'm just trying to make everything put itself into lists and remove themselves from lists they shouldn't be in. I don't know. We'll keep going, but not today. Tomorrow. Some other day. Maybe not tomorrow, actually. Probably not tomorrow. But tomorrow morning we'll continue programming Legends of Terrestria. And then we'll see. A lot to do right now, so I don't think we'll be programming that much. Anyway, until next time, thanks for hanging. Have a good night. Bye-bye.